Hello, welcome back to my channel, Hasty Books. I'm Camila, and today, to continue closing out 2021, I wanted to share my 10 favorite books of the year. And I read more than 130 books in 2021, so it was really difficult to pare it down to 10. I think my original list of favorite books was maybe up to 20, and I was like, no, I need to, only select the top. And there were some that were definitely like easy to add. I think about 5, and the other 5 were a bit like I had to do a bit of thinking, but I'm really pleased with this selection, and I think it represents my year of reading quite well as well, just generally. I did want to prelude going into the list by saying that for me, most of these were 4 or 5 stars. There was a few extra 5 stars that I just had a feeling like these 10 books, when I closed them, I was like, oh my god, I love that. This is definitely like a favorite. It kind of gave me this extra feeling. So there's extra 5-star one that I thought were really good, but not particularly that I love the experience. Sometimes like nonfiction is a little bit harder. Like I read some really good nonfiction, especially like feminist nonfiction texts and essays, but it doesn't really have that kind of same feeling, if you know what I mean. But anyway, let's dive straight into the list. And the first one is The Mermaid of Black Conch by Monique Roffey. This book came out in 2020 and promptly won the best novel and then overall winner for the Costa Book Awards in the UK. And I definitely understand why. It may have been why I heard about it, but I picked it up. I don't remember why, but I was just kind of intrigued by like the mermaid thing, and I don't know. I picked it up. I have a copy. And I read it and absolutely loved it. I think it was my first like 5-star of the year, and my first one that I was like, this is gonna be definitely my favorite books of the year, regardless of what comes next. And that's always a bit much because I think I read this in February or March, so it's quite early on in the year. So it is based on the island of Black Conch, and we basically follow, I think it's mostly 2 characters. So we have a fisherman who kind of fishes off of Black Conch, and that's kind of how he comes to be acquainted with a mermaid who lives in the water. And then it's really difficult to explain without giving spoilers, but there's like basically some white Americans who come to fish and end up catching the mermaid, and we kind of learn more about where she came from and her story. And it's kind of a really beautiful love story as well, which I didn't expect, but it's just so well done, like all around. Well written. Love the way it approached, like I guess, post-colonial experience in the Caribbean islands and race, and also I guess we kind of have an insight of like in terms of indigenous or like First Nation on the island and folklore, and there's just so much to it, and it's a huge recommend from me, and my first favorite book of 2021. The second book on my list is The Dictionary of Lost Words by Pip Williams. I believe this book also came out in 2020 in Australia, and then I think in 2021 in the UK. So I got an advanced copy through NetGalley, and I read it so quickly and absolutely adored it. If you've been following my channel for a little bit, maybe you'll have seen it over the summer. I did my mid-year freakout tag, and I could not stop talking about this book because I was obsessed with it. When I finished it, I was just in awe that this was Pip Williams' first novel, and she touches on so much, and especially like relating to like what I love to read about. So I was obviously obsessed with it. So this book actually also got shortlisted for the Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction. I believe I also saw it in the Goodreads Awards. It didn't win. I did vote for it because I had read it and adored it, but I don't think it won, obviously. So in this book, we follow a young girl. We follow her actually to most of her life, but she's a young girl when it starts, and basically she's living with her father, who works at Oxford, and they're kind of doing the creation and development of the first Oxford English Dictionary. And this was actually based in facts, which was what I found even more amazing about this book. So I believe that it was based on some real women, like some real names are included in this, but it's reimagining women's role in the creation of the dictionary. This is kind of mirrored in the fact that a lot of female words are purposefully ignored and left out of the dictionary, and I just love how she places women at the center of the story. And there's a discovery of words that were left out of the first draft of the Oxford English Dictionary, and you just get a real sense that of that women's rights, which then develops into like the suffragette movement, and we go through that in this book, and we go through the First World War. It's all around an incredibly beautiful and fabulous read. It's a huge recommend from me again. Obviously these 10 books, but this one was one that truly stayed with me all year, and it may be my top favorite book of the year, but it's really difficult to compare all these books because they're a bit different. Next we have Nervous Conditions by Tsitsi Dangarembga, which was published in 1988, so it's kind of a modern classic of African literature. I believe it's also the first book published by a Black woman from Zimbabwe in English. It also won the Commonwealth Prize for Fiction in 1989, and I believe it's like always on these lists of like top African books to read, and also I believe it was included on a list of top 100 books that have changed the world or shaped the world. So it was like a big one. It's quite short, but it has such an impact, and it's really, really well written. We follow a little girl who basically wants to get educated, and she's very adamant. And this is based in post-colonial Rhodesia, so that's kind of at the cusp of Zimbabwe becoming independent. So you also have that in the back as a backdrop, and it's truly amazing. When I finished it, I was like, oh, I can't wait for what comes next, and I was really pleased to see that there is actually a next book. I believe it's the Book of Naught, which I'm hoping to read this year because it's such an interesting character, excellent writer as well. Like the writing is so good. So I think that if you're looking for a book by female writer from Africa, I think this is like a really, really good one to start with, and it's quite short. And next we have another kind of African coming of age story. It's The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abi Dare, which was also published in 2020. So I think I kind of got into a little bit of rhythm there in all my 2020 books. So it's another story where we follow a young African girl who wants education, independence, and she just knows her worth despite society's oppression. So I don't want to say a lot about it because it's so incredibly kind of weaved, but basically we see her being sold into like a forced marriage with an older man. It's quite brutal, and when she escapes it, she heads into the capital of Nigeria and kind of learns to become her own person. Like she was very headstrong to start with, but she kind of starts educating herself, and she starts speaking up for herself, and that's what she's like, the louding voice is what she wants to represent for herself. And she also learned about her country that she's been growing up in and didn't know that much about, because the capital is so different from the rural village that she grew up in. And what I love is especially these little details, like every chapter, I believe it's when she's learning about Nigeria, every chapter from that point on has a fact about Nigeria. So you're kind of learning as you go with her as well, especially if you don't know that much about Nigeria. So it's really a wonderful book to kind of dive into, to get a really hopeful coming of age story. I think that it was really brutal and it had some really tough stuff in it, but I closed it and finished it so proud of this character and so happy and hopeful for her future. And I do like a book that kind of goes into hard-hitting subject but ends on a positive note, because I think you get the best of both worlds in that way. Then we get to number 5, but they're not really in order. But anyway, the 5th book on my list of 10 favorite books of 2021 was 10 Minutes 38 Seconds in a Strange World by Elif Shafak, which came out in 2019, and I believe that it was shortlisted for the Booker Prize that year actually. And I totally see why. It is an incredible book. We follow a sex worker, and it's kind of, we learn about her life and her death. We start with her having been murdered, and the 10 minutes 38 seconds are the last few moments of her life, and she gets like whiffs of sense, and she gets these memories that then show us flashbacks into her childhood and kind of how she became who she was, the really big impact that people had on her. It includes a lot of sexual violence, and I think this whole entire book is an exploration of that subject. So it's really difficult, and it's a massive trigger warning, obviously. However, it is so beautifully written. This has made me a huge fan of Elif Shafak, and I will think one day want to read her entire bibliography because she's just such a good writer. So the first part of the book is very much like those memories and her deaths, like her 10 minutes 38 seconds into death. The second part of the book is a little bit more absurd, but it's more in the perspective of her friend, a bit like a band of misfits that she's kind of befriended through the years, and they love her and want to give her a proper burial, and it's kind of the story at the end. And I just love the emphasis this had on chosen family. While this has a lot of violence and sexual violence, I still thought that was such a beautiful book, and not that it was hopeful, but it would just had such a beautiful quality to it. And especially because I think it focused on, like I said, the chosen family and the friends and the legacy that you leave behind and being kind to people, that I just absolutely loved it. My next favorite book of 2021 was The Reading List by Sara Nisha Adams, which came out in 2021. So I think that I had like a advanced copy through NetGalley, and I just loved it. I knew nothing about it when I picked it up or requested it. I just thought it was something with books. And I don't know, maybe it's just a reader and a writer thing, but I just love to read books that are set in bookshops or libraries and readers, you know, love it. And this did not disappoint. We have two main protagonists. So there's Alicia, who's like a teenager working in a library. She's a bit like nonchalant and like she doesn't really care that much about things. And there is Mukesh, who is a widower who has just lost his wife, and she loved books and he never really understood. So he finds himself at the library that Alicia is working at, and that's how they meet. And they discover the amazing impact and influence that books can have on us. And together they go on that journey because they find this reading list. The reading list is a really cute, like, leitmotif throughout the whole book. And it comes back again. We have glimpses of other people who have found the same reading list, and it's just really, really beautiful. It has some really tough subjects as well, including suicide, so that's another trigger warning. But I really wanted to highlight this because I thought it was a really, really beautiful commentary on the impact that books can have on us, you know, fiction and non-fiction, the way they represent our lives and the way we can feel or see ourselves in these things. And I think that everyone who loves books will enjoy that. Oh, and I meant to say that I think that this was also nominated in the Goodreads Awards, and I also didn't win, but I think I voted for it because it was truly very, very good. And I believe it was a debut novel, so another one that I thought was, you know, she knocked it out of the park. Next, I wanted to highlight Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas, which came out in 2020 as well. And I do think that this was shortlisted for some book awards as well. And I'm highlighting these not to show you what a basic bitch that I am, that I love what everyone loves, but just to show that I'm not the only one who loved it. So you don't have to just trust my judgment on these books. These books are really good. And I know like book prizes are very subjective, but I still just wanted to highlight the fact that they've been recognized and they are very good. So in Cemetery Boys, we follow a trans boy who is part of a family of basically like witches, so brujos and brujas, and it's, I think, like a Latinx community in the US. And I just loved overall the representation in this book, and like literally I at some point I just felt myself being so happy of all of this representation, especially Latinx, obviously being part of that community myself. But it was just so beautiful, and I thought it was just done so respectfully. It has so many like LGBT kind of characters, and it's difficult to explain exactly what it is, but our main character wants to prove to his family that he belongs and he's a brujo, and he kind of tries to summon a ghost, and then quite a lot unravels from there. And I don't want to say more because I feel like it unravels very slowly. You can sort of see a little bit where things are going, but it's such a good YA, and it ends in a hopeful note as well. It just made me very happy to read this. Next, we have The Five by Hallie Rubenhold, which is the untold lives of the women killed by Jack the Ripper. And this was also nominated with loads of stuff, and it actually won the Billy Gifford Prize for Nonfiction in 2019, which is when it came out, and it was also shortlisted for the Wolfson History Prize in 2020. And it's no wonder because it is so well written, so well researched. So I discussed this in a recent video because I was wrapping up having read it. And what I love the most is that I didn't really know actually much about Jack the Ripper. And we don't learn that much about kind of the crimes themselves, but we learn about the lives of the women whom he killed. And that includes literally like some of them from their birth, their parents, like where they're from, and there's such like a variety of backgrounds. And then we dive very much so into what life was like back in that era, and especially like in London. So if she would introduce us to, let's say, like a husband of one of the women who's doing this kind of job, then she introduces us as well to like the condition that they could expect. So the kind of salary, where they could have lived, the conditions they would have been faced with. And I thought that was such an incredible window into that era. And I love that historical perspective because not only did it give a voice back to these women that is always just, oh, the women, the prostitutes that Jack the Ripper killed. These were women and they had backgrounds and families, and it's just beautiful to see all of that background. And there's an inevitability, obviously, to where their life is going because you know that they're the victim. So then every story ends with their death. And I just kept being like, please, just don't go this way. But it's very much a book that highlights the situation that women especially were faced in those days. If they were discarded by their husband, had nowhere to live, and they had to live in sin and like all of that stuff, which society really put on them and then judged them for it. So it's such an interesting commentary, and it's a big recommend for anyone looking for a historical nonfiction. Now we're at the last two, and they're both kind of the classics that I love the most in 2021. So let's start with North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell, which was published in 1854. This is a top classic from the Victorian era, and at the moment, I think it is my favorite Victorian novel. It was so incredible to read, and it's very long-winded, like let's be completely honest. But there's like so much meat on this story that I feel like adds such a realness. Like it felt so real when you're reading this, and all of the side characters and their conditions, and it's just so beautifully crafted and weaved. I believe that it was maybe published as a serial, but I don't know the details. It is very much so of a social novel that discusses the way that people used to live. And I'm saying that because we follow the main character, Margaret, who moves from the south to a northern city, which I believe is meant to be Manchester. And through her eyes, like along with her, we see the conditions that people live through, especially the working class and the working poor during the industrialization of England. And it's such an interesting look at that, and especially because the main character is also almost like an external looker, just like us. So we kind of learn along with her, and we come to like the characters that she judges at the beginning, and just a lot of like the social commentary is so good, as well as being quite a lovely love story as well. And if you've seen the series, which is excellent as well, it's just so, it just reminds me so much of Pride and Prejudice. Like it's just really beautiful, and that kind of like I judged you too soon kind of story, and it's just so well done. And then this leads me to the last book on my list of favorite books of 2021, which was Persuasion by Jane Austen. And I loved it. It's maybe a bit of an outlier because as I reread all of the Jane Austens, this one was one that I was like, oh, I don't really totally see why people loved it. But I listened to the audiobook, and then because people were like, oh no, it's so good. So I decided to reread it during my holiday, and I absolutely loved it, and I saw why people loved it so much. I believe that this was Jane Austen's last novel, and it was actually published 6 months after her death in 1817, I want to say. And what was really funny is that when I was doing research to just put together like all the years and stuff like that for this list, when I was on North and South, it literally said like, oh, if you love North and South, check out Persuasion by Jane Austen. And I was like, that's the next one on my list. So clearly they were right. So in this one, we follow Jane Austen's oldest heroine. And she was basically, when she was younger, she was persuaded to reject a marriage proposal by someone who didn't really have money. And she was really sad about it. And I think it's like 8 or 9 years later, she's still single and she's older. I think she's in her like late 20s, which is like spinster alert in those days. And she kind of gets to see him again. I think his name's Frederick Wentworth, yeah. And you see like this spark that they have, and they're both like a bit like, she feels very sorry that she rejected him, and now he has come into some money. I guess it's like the nouveau riche kind of not stereotype but trope that actually is also in a North and South, which I thought was really interesting, the parallel there as well. So there's a lot of a chat in this book about heartache and I guess like pretending to like certain things, certain people, and pretending to be rich and pretending, just so much pretension, just generally. I thought it was very similar to Pride and Prejudice in that way. Well, all of the novels very much are, but this one, I thought the love story, the way that, honestly, spoiler alert, but like the way that they rekindle their love was just so relatable and so beautiful. And I think that's what really sold me on this novel. Maybe because also the heroine is a little bit older, like the main character, and kind of can relate to that a little bit more, at my age anyway. So yeah, I just absolutely loved it. And I don't know if it has dethroned Pride and Prejudice as my favorite Jane Austen, but you'll have to come back to watch my Jane Austen video to know. So these were my top 10 favorite books of 2021, and there was so many more like 5-star reads and books that I loved over 2021. Obviously I read so many, but these were like the top ones that I like are huge recommend. And I waited till the last minute to make this list. I was like, what if a book that I'm trying to finish is gonna wow me? I'm just so excited about these, and I would love to know if you've read any of them, if you share my opinion, like what you thought about them when you read them, and what was your favorite read in 2021. As always, thank you for watching, and hey, see you back. Bye!